gonna need you to be a handsome model for Mom today, okay? Hey there, Fiber Junkies! Welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast. We're going to do something we haven't done for a while, which is just check in and see what I've been knitting. And I have a co-host here just for a quick little minute today. Hi. Hi, this is Remington. He is my son, and he has been growing very rapidly, so some of you guys have seen little bits of him on my Instagram from time to time, but I wanted him to come and model his Leaves or Not cardigan. I've talked about this on the channel before, and I showed the little cardigan when I was finished knitting it, but I hadn't yet put it on him, and so I wanted you guys to see how handsome he looks in his sweater. He is modeling it for us. I just knit this out of a Malabrigo Rios, which is their worsted weight. And this color is called Sandbank. It has this darling shawl collar, which is my favorite style of cardigan, especially for gentlemen's cardigans. And you can choose whether or not to put pockets on it, and I chose that I would put the little leaf-shaped pockets on the front. So I used just some leftovers of one of my Dryad DK skeins in the color Forgeries of Jealousy, which is a real springy green. Hello, baby boy. So he is modeling this darling little cardigan. It just has one button closure, which he can't seem to keep buttoned today because he's, as you can see, a wiggle worm. So thank you for coming on, Remington. Thank you. You are a great model. Thanks for showing up. Can you say bye? So I wanted to show you guys some things that I have been working on because we've been really busy with dyeing yarn and shipping orders and doing Saturday night at the movies and all kinds of fun things. So I haven't gotten to show you guys what I've been working on. Now partly that is by design because as a new mom with a little kid and a business that I'm running out of the house, all on my own with no employees, it can get kind of crazy from day to day. So I find that I have a lot less knitting time than I used to have prior to having kids. I'm sure most of you guys who have children can relate. So I'm going to start with something that I have been working on, but I've been making really slow progress at because honestly I just keep getting really bored. So I recently released my Kansas City collection. I am doing this in kind of multiple parts. So the first 4 colorways of the Kansas City collection launched in my website on Friday, May 15th. So I am going to have those up just for a couple of weeks. So click the link in this description box. The top link is the one to my shop where you can find those colors and you can get them ordered, dyed on your choice of base. And I will be adding to the collection with more colors in the future, but right now I wanted to start with just 4 colors so that I could get you guys starting to knit with some of those awesome colors while I keep perfecting and working on some other ones that I'll be adding later. But one of the colorways that I decided to start with was this color called Barbecue Burnt Ends. This is a skein of the Bombshell Worsted from my shop in that colorway. I really love how it turned out. It's just layers of crimson and red and kind of like peppery, orangey browns mixed with chocolate and pecan and like lots and lots of brown and red basically in lots and lots of glazes and different versions because the idea is it's supposed to look like barbecue sauce. I really love how this came out. It's very, very subtle, but you can actually see the like subtle shifts of the color. And because it's so subtle, it works well for really highly textured stitch patterns like the cables that I'm doing in this scarf. So I cast this scarf on probably a little over a month ago, and I was making really great progress on it, and then I just kind of hit this bump where I just didn't want to work on it, and so I have been moving very slowly on it lately. So I'm trying to get the excitement to keep working on this again. This is going to be a scarf for my husband. He had actually asked me to knit him a new scarf last fall when I was very pregnant with our child, and at the time I was just really busy and I was like, you know, I don't have time to like dye you up some yarn and all of this, and so I told him I'd do it later, and then right after I had the baby I was just not knitting a lot anyways. So I finally got around to casting it on, and he keeps teasing me about how it'll finally be ready in the middle of August or something when he can't possibly wear it. And I said, yes, but then you'll be prepared for next winter. So it is going to be a next winter scarf because it's already end of May and I haven't even finished it. But I feel like I'm at least halfway done. He is very tall. He's over 6 feet tall, so he likes his scarves to be quite long so he can wrap them around a couple of times and still have some decent length. So I'm trying to make this nice and long, and I wanted it to be fairly skinny because I liked that really like kind of elegant, crisp, skinny, long look. I really love this pattern. This is called the Antler Scarf, and it comes out of a book called The Son of Stitch and Bitch by Debbie Stoller. She's the original Stitch and Bitch creator, and her books are always really fun, but I especially love The Son of Stitch and Bitch for her men's patterns. She just has a really great variety in there, and they're not all knitting patterns either. She does have some crochet as well, but there's a big variety from all these different designers, everything from like hats and caps to like messenger bags and pillows shaped like beer bottles and like anything and everything. It's a really great variety. But I loved this really simple but elegant scarf pattern. It has cables on each side, which kind of help to keep it from curling because stockinette does tend to curl, and this one keeps it from curling because the curl is sort of built into it. It really pops the cables and makes them look very structural and crisp. And then there's this other big like horseshoe cable running down the middle. And it does kind of look like antlers on a deer or something. So that's where the name comes from. So I'm just using that pattern. I'm really loving this scarf. I think it's going to look really, really stunning on my husband once it's done. I just really need to light a fire under my rear end and finish this project because he really does want that scarf, and I want him to have it. I just get really bored. I specifically picked that pattern too because I was like, this is more interesting than most normal scarf patterns with the multiple cables going on and all of that. This will keep me really interested. But I'm still struggling to stay interested because after doing the same thing for like 2 feet, I start getting really, really bored. The next thing that I am working on, I'm actually not going to tell you a lot of information about it. I just want to kind of briefly show it. But I have been working for a couple months now on a new sweater pattern. The reason I'm not going to show you all the details, I'm not even going to tell you the name of the pattern or where I found it. I will give you a hint. I found it in a pattern book. But the reason I'm not going to go into all of that now is because I am going to do a much more detailed video on this particular sweater for an upcoming Saturday night at the movies. This will be our featured pattern for one of our upcoming videos on that. So I wanted to save all of the talk about like the specific book and my thoughts on the pattern and how it's written and all of that stuff, my review of it, for that time. But I did want to show you that I've been working on this for a while and I still have a ways to go. This is a vintage pattern. It's from the 1940s, and it's basically just a lace body. That's actually the wrong side. I just showed you. This is the right side. It's a lace body, so the whole thing is lace except for the ribbing at the waistband and like on the cuffs of the sleeves, and then there's a little fold over collar. So it's going to be a short sleeve sweater that buttons up the front and is a very like 1940s style. It's not as fitted as a lot of the 40s patterns that I typically like to wear. It's a little bit more like blousey. And it's kind of like a jacket style cardigan with a little collar and buttons and everything, but it's short sleeved. So you can wear it as the top itself. It doesn't have to go over something per se, or you can wear it over another top, or I'm thinking about putting it with like wearing a little full body vintage slip with a little pencil skirt or something, and then wearing this cardigan over it so that there's a slip underneath and you have kind of that pretty little like lacy detail and stuff. So it's not like wearing nothing underneath it, but it's also not wearing a whole nother shirt. That's kind of how I'm envisioning wearing it, but we'll see. I have completed the back. It is knit in pieces in the vintage style, which is not my favorite way to knit sweaters. I tend to be I'm a vintage style, but modern tools and techniques kind of girl. So I tend to prefer knitting in the round with as little seaming and sewing as possible. However, I do understand that there are certain times when you just really do need to seam stuff and you need the structure and all that. So I have completed one of the front sides. I've completed the right side of the sweater. I'm now working on the left front of the sweater, and it's the same stitch pattern, but you do have to do a lot of like waist shaping and armhole shaping and all of that stuff, and there's button bands. I do love that the button bands are knit directly onto each piece as opposed to knitting the sweater and then picking up stitches along the side and knitting the button bands that way. I really like when they put the button band just on the piece. Does that make sense? Like you don't have to pick up stitches and do all of that. You can just knit across your pattern and then you place a marker and the last like 8 or 10 stitches or whatever is the button band, so you knit it in seed stitch or garter stitch or ribbing or whatever it is. I like to do that better because, again, less sewing and fewer like pick up stitches and all of that stuff. Not that I can't pick up stitches or that I don't think there's ever a place for it, but honestly, when you're picking up around an entire sweater front, it gets very tedious. So anytime I can avoid some of that, I'm a big fan of that. So it looks kind of a mess right now because since this is a very intricate lace on both sides kind of a pattern, you do have to block it fairly aggressively. And so I am really hoping, I did a gauge swatch and blocked it like a good girl and did my measurements like multiple times, and I'm pretty sure I'm making the correct size, but I'm very nervous that this is going to end up being much too big by the time I get it all blocked and everything. So I really hope not, but I'm trying to just trust my numbers and my swatch and my math and just hope that it's okay. I am knitting this out of some of my hand-dyed yarn. It's actually in a new colorway that hasn't been released in my shop yet and isn't going to be coming out for a little bit yet. And this is actually not the final version of the colorway. This was an original test batch I did of this kind of soft, sort of antique-y blue. I am working on, I have actually perfected this color. It's very, very similar to this, but just slightly different in the final version. But it's not released yet. It is part of a vintage series that I am planning, which is going to end up being huge. I'd started with the idea of doing a really simple little vintage series, and then it grew into a bigger vintage series, and then the idea just kept growing, and now it's going to be a gargantuan vintage series that's probably going to take me like a year or two to release completely. But that's okay, it's going to be amazing. So I do not have a release date yet on these colors, but this is kind of your first little sneak peek. The final version is even prettier than this. It's very, very, very close and similar. It just has the tiniest bit of like seafoamy green, a little bit more of the seafoamy green that's in here, which you may not even be able to see. It's so subtle on the camera. But the final version is just a little bit prettier, a little bit neater and crisper, and I love it. But this is really close, and so I'm knitting with the sample version for my sweater. And I will tell you more about that in a video that will be coming up quite soon once we get to Saturday night at the movies. I'm really excited about the next thing that I cast on. I have a new project that I just cast on a little over a week ago, and I was making super great progress on it right away, and then I kind of put it on hold to go back and work on the vintage sweater again. But I think this one's going to be done fairly soon because I love it, and it's a DK weight sweater, so it's knitting up much quicker than my traditional fingering weight. I tend to knit with a lot of sock yarn and even for garments and stuff. So working in a DK has been really fun because it's a vintage style cropped cardigan that is knit in a DK weight, so it's going much faster than I'm used to, and I'm really excited about it because it's going to be so cute. Back at the beginning of the shelter at home order quarantine that everybody was experiencing back in like March, several designers put some of their patterns up for either discounted prices or even giving away a free pattern. And one of the designers that I really enjoy, named Andi Satterlund, put up her patterns. She had, you could choose any pattern from her shop for free with a coupon code at the beginning of the shelter at home order. And because of that, I had been stocking a bunch of her vintagey style patterns that I really liked for some time, and so I went to go get my free pattern and couldn't decide which one I wanted free, so I bought like 5. It's fine, it's no big deal. But this is the one that I chose as my free pattern. It is called the Populuxe, and it's this really darling little 1950s or early 60s, kind of almost Mad Men era-esque cropped sweater. 3/4 length sleeves or elbow length sleeves, although you could extend them or even make them shorter if you choose. And then it's really simple, mostly stockinette body, but it just has these lovely little like sunburst eyelets around the collar and on the back and down at the base right before the ribbing around the waistline. So I really, really liked it. I was looking for something like this that would just slip over little sundresses or be like a good little springtime and summer lightweight but cutesy fun sweater. And I wanted something that was more interesting than just plain stockinette, so I love the little eyelets on it, but I did want something that was mostly garter or stockinette because I really wanted to use this. I purchased this specifically for a particular yarn. I was wanting to knit with a color from my shop called Unbirthday Party, which is part of my Alice in Wonderland collection that came out in January. And here it is. I am obsessed with how this is knitting up, you guys. I cannot say enough about this. When I created the Alice in Wonderland collection, I loved every single color that I put in that collection so much. And it's always hard for me to pick favorites among my dyed skeins, but out of that whole collection, this became my very favorite, my personal favorite. It's so stunning, and it's definitely going to be a regular in my shop all the time just because of how much I personally love it, and the fact that it is speckled and it's exciting, but it's not so busy of a speckle that you can't do some kind of fun eyelets and interesting texture and stuff. And I just love it. It reminds me of like a birthday cake or confetti and ice cream with sprinkles. It's just that fun, like happy, awesome kind of color. The aqua with the hot pink speckles and the flashes of gold and brown just really feel like cupcakes and sprinkles to me. So I think this is going to be a really fun little cardigan. As you can see, I have the body mostly done. You start by knitting the back of this piece, and then you knit the front sections down from you go back to the cast on edge and pick up stitches and knit them down a little bit. Then you join under the arms and knit as one piece back and forth in rows. So it's not knit in the round, but you do minimal seaming because you just knit your fronts and top kind of separately, combine them, and then join them under the arm. So I'm almost done with the body. As I mentioned, this is a cropped vintage style, so it is going to be a shorter sweater than a lot of more modern things, which is what I wanted, to go with like my high-waisted trousers and kind of that 40s, 50s look. So I'm loving how cropped this is and how cute it is, and then I just have to, I'm almost done, I'm just working on the ribbing right now. Then I have to go back and pick up the sleeves and do those, and then there is a little bit of a collar that I need to put on at the end, and yeah, that'll be it. And finally, to finish off, I have a finished item, actually two finished items to show you that I'm really excited about. So I can't wait to show you this. If you've been on my Instagram or Facebook, you have probably already seen some of this over there. I've been sharing some photos and talking about this with the release of my new Kansas City collection. So this may be old news to you, but I still wanted to go ahead and show you some finished objects that I recently created. These next two projects are both knit out of one skein of fingering weight yarn from my shop. I use the Fairy Wing fingering, which is 80% superwash merino and 20% silk to create these beautiful objects, but you could use any fingering weight yarn. This would be excellent for the Foxy sock, which is my best-selling base. It's a superwash merino nylon sock yarn. It would also be great in the Dryad sock, which adds a little bit more luxury with the addition of cashmere in there. It would be great in even the Banshee, which is just 100% superwash merino, but it really looks excellent in the two-ply yarns, which is the Foxy sock and the Fairy Wing fingering, because of the way they show off the colors and just the way that they beautifully drape and hold their shape. So I wanted to show you what I created. Both of these projects were made out of the same skein of yarn, and I wanted to show off one of my new Kansas City colorways. So from my new KC collection, I chose the first color that I created for that collection, which was Plaza Lights. And I wanted to show how the colors fall because it can be a little bit intimidating in the skein and people aren't quite sure how it's going to knit up. So I chose two separate projects to show you two different gauges and stitch patterns, and you can see how the color looks in that. So basically there are these long color runs of sapphire and navy. It's a real dimensional, different shades of blue, from kind of a soft blue to deep sapphire and dark, dark navy. And so that's a long color run, and then it's broken with long color runs of white background with all these bright colored speckles. So you get some blue, yellow, green, pink, purple, orangey, just all these fun explosions of color. So Plaza Lights is an amazing, really, really gorgeous skein, and it's one of those indie dyed skeins where you don't want to pick up stitch pattern that is too busy because it really won't show off the stitch pattern well or the color well. So this shines best in simple stitches. So stockinette, chevrons, garter stitch, seed stitch, simple eyelets and simple lace would be fine. Nothing really complicated though, nothing that's going to look like leaf shapes or any of that stuff. You want to keep it very simple, so just little eyelets and things, those kinds of styles. So this is what it looks like in the skein, and here's what I knitted with my Fairy Wing version. The first thing I did were these absolutely stunning little fingerless mitts. I love, 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 love how these came out. And I'm hoping by the time this video gets uploaded that I will have at least a rough draft copy ready, but I'm not sure that I will. So this pattern I actually came up with myself just to show off these colors. It's incredibly simple. It's knit in the round, so there's no seaming, and it's really, really simple stockinette with a little bit of some eyelet lace and little extra textured bits here and there to just kind of like create some interest. But I wanted to be able to show off the colors of the Plaza Lights really, really well, and I wanted to show several stitch patterns in there with the eyelet, with the stockinette, etc. Now this is knit on a size 1 circular needle, so pretty tiny needles, and I have pretty small, narrow hands, so it's not a very big circumference. So you can see how at that gauge, it kind of creates a stripy effect, but it's not as consistent as a self-striping yarn, so it's not necessarily going to do that. This would be similar to how it would look in socks, so it will have that same kind of like messy stripy. It's not going to be crisp, clean stripes like self-striping yarn, but it has that kind of like tiny little stripes, messy, stripy kind of effect. It definitely reads as a stripe from a distance, even though it's not super clean and crisp. The next thing that I knit out of that same skein, when I was done with those fingerless gloves, I had quite a bit of the skein left, or over half of it, so I decided to make something else. And I knit a hat. Of course, because I'm such a hat girl. My go-to project is almost always a hat or a shawl. And so I actually found a pattern online. At the time that I found this, the pattern was a free pattern, but I will put a link to it below, and hopefully it still will be free or very inexpensive for you. This pattern starts with like a twisted rib at the bottom, and then it's just this real slouchy beanie shape. And just a really simple stockinette chevron, which I love, 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 love how it looks. Now I did knit this in the round, but I did a size 4 needle instead of the size 1 that I used on these. So you can see how on the size 1 and on a smaller circumference, it comes out, it reads as really, really tiny stripes and just a really busy kind of overall stripy look, but very like kind of messy jumbled stripes. It's not super crisp and clean. These ones look quite a bit cleaner, and that's because the stripes are a little bit more like 2 rows instead of just 1 like on the gloves, and that's due to the larger needle size and the larger circumference, as well as the stitch pattern is different. So you can see how that changes the way the yarn colors fall. At the top of this hat, so I wear mine as a slouchy beanie, but this pattern does include instructions and a photo that shows how you can block it on a dinner plate and get it to look more of like a beret, where it's got like the big wide top that kind of flops over. But you can see at the top here, when you get to the top decreases, there are big sections of color that you don't have other parts, so it pools differently. It lays quite a bit differently. That is due to the decreases and the way the pattern changes in the crown of the hat. And then again, you've got at the top, it looks a lot more like my gloves because you've got a much smaller circumference and you're decreasing rapidly. So that kind of changes how the colors are going to fall. I loved that these two projects really get to show you quite a bit more of how this looks. Now again, if you were knitting back and forth in rows instead of in the round, or if you are doing a different project, it will look different. That is why it is really important to swatch anytime you're working with any yarn that you're unfamiliar with the colors and how they fall. Anytime it's a variegated or speckled or anything other than a solid yarn, you definitely want to swatch it with your stitch pattern to see if you're going to like how it falls. If you're going to be knitting in the round, you really want to swatch in the round as opposed to back and forth, because it will fall differently based on the construction, technique, the needle size, etc. So definitely make sure you're swatching, because if you did this in a sweater, it's going to look different yet again than either of these two projects because it's a bigger circumference. If you do it back and forth for a hat or for a sweater, it's going to look different than when you do it in the round. But hopefully this will help you to envision it just a little bit better. I really, really love this color. I love how these things came out. I love how they look as a set, and I'm super happy with them. So I hope you guys will get inspired to cast on some fun projects with this colorway, because it really is just so much fun to knit with. I had so much fun knitting these projects. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and make sure you turn on the notification bell so that you don't ever miss an episode. I hope you guys have really enjoyed seeing what I've been working on and the things that I have been doing to keep myself busy. There's always way more projects that I have to knit and spin and crochet and dye than I have possibly time for in a day. So I just try to do what I can, but there's always more that I want to do. I've been doing a lot of spinning as well, so hopefully soon I can show you some of those results. But it is now time to cast off. Love you!